Christmas! Turkeys, reindeers, robins. It's a time of animals, really, isn't it? And I love animals. I've got a house full of them at home. But then again, who doesn't? How often do you hear people say, oh, I don't like animals, they're boring, or I don't like animals, they're a bit of a waste of time? Not very often, do you? We see animals in many different ways, in advertising, on the television, in children's stories, and most of all, in movies. For years now, filmmakers like Walt Disney have influenced our attitude towards animals by humanising them, giving them names, characters, personalities, adventures. But of course, the life of a real wild animal is very different. But I think what fascinates us is the possibility that they do think, feel, and have emotions. Absolutely fantastic. There's a million things you'd like to know about these creatures, isn't there? And luckily, I'm with someone who might be able to help me. Chris Packham, naturalist and broadcaster. How do you do?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
Very well indeed.
Why is it that we're so fascinated by wild animals?
I don't know, we've all got that intrinsic fascination. I think there are three fundamental reasons. Firstly, so many of them are exotic and so very different than us. I mean, you have to look at the head of one of these giraffes. I mean, no matter how warty we might turn out in later life, we're not going to look like that. So they do look so different. Jellyfish, I mean, they may as well be aliens from another planet. Secondly, they exhibit such a diverse array of behaviours, which again are so different from us in the way that they reproduce, the way that they fly. I mean, we can't even fly. I mean, that's what draws me to birds, for instance. I mean, wouldn't I just love to be up there for 15 minutes as a swallow?
Absolutely.
And lastly, I think it's purely an aesthetic thing, and people often ask me, you know, what is it about birds that really grabs you? And it sounds shallow, but it's the way they look. They are so extraordinarily beautiful. And again, it's whatever turns you on. I mean, giraffes, for me, are more fascinating than beautiful. But, oh, how can I say that? Look at that tongue. Oh, yes.
And why do we humanise them? Why do we project our own ideas of personality on them?
I think that stems from a time when we presumed that animals didn't have characters of their own. But if we were to speak to the keeper here, he'd say, well, that one over there, that one's a bit naughty, and oh, that's a nice one, that's a much nicer temperament. And they do all have their own characters. I mean, I remember having, you know, lots of pets, and birds in particular, birds of prey. You know, you get one that wants to fly and the other one that wants to sit on the fence post and wait for you to feed it. I've had spiders, I've got to tell you, that have had different characters. You know, ones which are very pleased to come out and walk over your hand, and others that just want to skulk in the corner, you know. Same species,
sure.
Just different temperament.
Well, I shall remember that next time I'm about to squash a bluebottle, yeah.
Well, only squash a, you know, a bad one.
That's right.
Not a nice guy.
I shall observe him for a number of days beforehand.
Converse with that bluebottle.
So historically, we've got most of our understanding from animals from films and books, but we don't always get it right, do we?
No, we don't get it right, and I think you're right. Historically, we generally get it wrong. I mean, if you think of Pinocchio, that story, and the whale, it's portrayed there as a giant behemoth, a ship-sinking monster. These days, we've learned so much more about them. We know that they're very gentle, social animals. Many people have turned them into sort of natural icons. They almost worship them now, so they've had a complete transformation of image.
Chris, we're looking at some tigers in captivity here. Is there a point in keeping animals in captivity?
It's absolutely essential that we keep animals in captivity. It's equally essential that we do it well, and we've done it so badly in the past. And the reason for that is that we develop a great interest and understanding of them by watching them on TV or looking at pictures in books, or these days on CD-ROM. But until you can stand alongside of something like it, I mean, I can smell these tigers. You can't smell a CD-ROM, can you? And develop a real affinity for the animal, you've got to see it in the flesh. And of course, you know, from a conservation point of view, we ask so many members of the public to help in conservation efforts. What interest have they got unless they love them as much as you can get to love them by just standing here? I mean, look at that.
Yeah, sure.
There's just something so impressive about standing alongside a tiger. You don't get the scale. You just don't get the scale until you're standing here. And
absolutely right.
I mean, the head's that big, isn't it? I mean, it's just terrifying.
So are there moves around the world to make the habitats of these animals more natural?
There are. And it's long overdue, really.
Yeah.
The excuse is that we didn't know in the Victorian age what animals needed in captivity, and the objective was to put them in a tiny box with some bars, and so that you could gawp at something really bizarre. These days, we do see them on TV, and we see them behaving naturally, and the only way to get an animal to behave naturally is to put it in an environment that's, you know, reflects that it would live in the wild. And so we've learned so much more about all sorts of different species that we can do that now. And here at Marwell, they make a good job of naturalising the enclosures.
Here in the UK, recreating natural habitats for wild animals can be extremely difficult, not least because of the weather. But find a warmer climate, some natural resources, and you can really begin to create a whole new world for them. So, I'm off to an animal park in Florida to meet some experts who are trying to do just that. It should be very interesting and a jolly sight warmer. I was 5 years old when I first saw Dumbo, and who didn't fall in love with him? From the very beginning, animals have been at the centre of Walt Disney's greatest creations. Disney's connection with animals goes right back to Walt's own childhood in Missouri. He grew up amongst cows, pigs, and goats. And his school notebook showed drawings of these creatures. A fascination with animals that was to go right throughout his life. First came a mouse, then a duck, a dog, chipmunks, a bear, and many, many more. As well as introducing a generation of children to imaginary animals, Disney also introduced real animals to the public through the True Life Adventures. Began in 1948, these films were revolutionary. And they are one of the reasons why we have such an abundance of wildlife filmmaking in the world today. Also, they were among the first films really to make people aware of the wonders of wildlife. Why are we so fascinated by animals? However many times you see an elephant, you still wonder at it. I think it's because we envy so much about the way wildlife works. It's more efficient than we are. If a female termite's looking for a mate, she doesn't say, "Oh, I hope I find someone who's good looking who brings me chocolates and flowers." Or if a wildebeest's hungry, he doesn't say, "I'm putting on a bit of weight, I better only have a light salad and a bowl of soup." It eats the same things every day. Life is less complicated and more efficient. And I think because part of us wants to be like these creatures, we often imagine they behave as we do. A crucial part of the process of keeping animals happy and content is, of course, feeding them. They need natural foods that they can find in the wild and supplements to keep them well and happy. This involves a variety of operations that take place in a food centre that wouldn't look out of place in a five-star hotel. And what is this I'm seeing before me, a menu?
Yes, for our parrots for Flights of Wonder bird show.
So they have a starter and a main course?
Sort of. They got a fruit mix and a vegetable mix for two different diets.
Fantastic. And what's going on over here?
I'm getting the diet ready for our naked mole rats.
Naked mole rat, what would that be?
That is like a small, naked, some people consider it a rat, but it's actually a mole, lives underground, and a large colony similar to bees.
And what is his preferred diet?
We give them whole vegetables, turnips, squash, corn on the cob, bananas, walnuts, peanuts, sweet potatoes.
We're having a dinner party on Friday night. Maybe you could come round. And what deliciousness are you preparing?
We're preparing a fish for kingfisher, new bird that we just got in.
And what are these fish?
They're small smelt.
Smell. They look very like whitebait. With a bit of batter, I think it'd be absolutely delicious. Okay, come closer, come closer. We're going to see something very exciting here. The keepers are just about to put out some food for the gorillas, who are also just about to come out. And the keepers put food out and they spread it around so that the gorillas feel like they've foraged it, and it keeps them excited. And it's going to be very close. It's going to be just over here. Well, they've finished laying out all the food, and now they're going to let the gorillas out. And here they are. The big silverback's just on his way down from the top of the hill. Now they're putting out some more food, and they're hoping that we might see a mother and a baby. So that was fantastic, Sean. We saw a little baby there and everyone.
Yeah, they're so great.
They're fantastic. So we saw you putting out food earlier. Why were you spreading it around in the way that you...
Well, actually, the gorillas out in the wild would normally be foraging throughout the day. And we try to set up the same type of habitat that they would have in the wild. So we go ahead and spread the food out so that they forage throughout the day. And we also use a lot of smaller items we call enrichment items, like rice or sunflower seeds that are small, and that will take them a little bit longer to pick up.
So Jeff, the whole point of this place is for people to get closer to animals, which I can understand with gorillas and some of the more sedentary beasts. But how on earth do you do that with birds?
We sort of involve everybody. They become researchers with us, and we have free-flighted birds that can interact really closely with the public by feeding them, by bringing them to us with some food that they're naturally used to feeding on.
How would you get them to come down?
Well, what I can do is I can give you some of their favorite little treat here. I'll give you some live mealworms.
Oh, thank you very much.
And come with me over here and put them up on a branch here. And they're very much accustomed to being fed right in close proximity to the trail here.
Right.
So, right, just get them up onto the branches here. And of course, by using the live food for the birds, it does attract their attention. The movement of the worms now is going to catch the eye of the birds. And in just a second here, we'll have some birds coming down and realizing that there's something to eat on the branches.
All sorts of animals existed millions of years ago that we'll never see again. We can just look at their bones and use our imaginations. This is the skeleton of a real Tyrannosaurus rex, 65 million years old, and I'm afraid he looks it. The current fascination with dinosaurs has much to do with the fact that no one has ever seen one. They seem to be creatures of mythology, yet we know they were real. But there's a conservation message here. Perhaps people 10,000 years in the future will look at the skeleton of a giraffe and wonder whether such a marvelous creature ever existed. Recently, an almost complete skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus rex was found in South Dakota. It's being reassembled here in conjunction with the Field Museum of Chicago. This is truly one of the great fossil finds of the century.
When it's complete, the skeleton will be minimally 45 feet long. It'll stand between 17, 18 feet high at the hips. The skull itself is nearly 5 feet in length.
That is big.
Yeah, pretty impressive.
And what exactly is going on here?
Well, what she's doing is using a tool that's much like a mini jackhammer, an air-driven tool that you can use to in a very controlled way, remove the rock sediment from around the bone.
And how will she know when she's not actually going into the bone?
A number of different ways. A lot of it is feel of the tool, but also a lot of it is visual, a color change, a difference in texture, or when you do encounter bone and find a smooth surface, you can actually begin to follow that shape. Also, she knows the shape of these bones. She knows what she's looking for.
Is it not a rather terrifying job dealing with stuff that's obviously irreplaceable?
You get used to it after a while, and after you do it for so long, not making any mistakes, after a while you lose that fear. But you still have to be on your guard.
Well, these big ones certainly do give you a feeling of the overall size. The tibia, which is the shin bone.
These are the shin bones here, and of course this is the thigh bone, the femur. Well, here you can see what one of the blocks looks like when it's completed. You can see several of the tail vertebrae, in this case number 19 through 22, and the chevron bone. And on the table behind us, you can see another of the tibia, the shin bones, and this bone still has not been completely reassembled.
So when you get all the pieces finished and cleaned, how do you actually assemble them? How will they actually be held together?
We use a variety of glues and epoxies, everything from your garden variety super glue to marine epoxies and epoxies that we can actually sculpt with to fill in missing pieces.
Some of the most important contributions to running a wildlife operation come from the horticulturalists, who grow vast amounts of trees, shrubs and flowers, as you can see, not only in order to make the park look attractive and authentic, but to feed the animals and to make them feel as comfortable as they can in an environment that's as close as possible to the wild.
You can see here the variety and the quantity of material, the plants that it takes to keep the animals satiated.
And it's strange to think these are such beautiful plants just going to be eaten.
Yeah, well, they're hopefully beautiful and palatable enough that they eat this stuff and not, you know, some of the other stuff that we'd rather not eat. Actually, some of the animals we collect just the blooms.
Yeah?
And provide them with the blooms, and they gobble up the blooms all
It really is 5-star. Now, who would eat these then?
Well, these are plants for browsers.
Yeah.
So you have to understand there's two types of animals out there. There's browsers and grazers. The grazers are nibbling at the grass.
Yeah.
And the browsers are eating the flesh from a trunk of a tree and the leaves from a tree and bushes and shrubs and stuff like that. A lot of the deer, a lot of the primates and animals like that will eat the hibiscus.
So how did a horticulturalist from New Jersey learn about the savannah?
The hard way. You know, trial and error had a lot to do with it. But one of the things we realize is if you honor the mystique of some of these animals and try to provide as much variety as you perhaps like in your own diet, you have a better chance of making them happy and keeping the place looking well.
Sure. And you never get fed up with the animals? Eating all your beautiful plants?
I still have a little bit of horticulturist left in me. But you can see here these bananas, the primates especially, but also elephant. We'll take as much of this banana as we can provide.
Really?
You know, last week we provided 7,000 pounds of this type of material.
Well, I've just put one in my back garden, so I better keep an eye out for elephants.
Just keep your address a secret.
And presumably you have to be careful about what they can and can't eat and what's poisonous and what isn't.
Yeah. You know, horticulturists generally don't pride themselves on growing things to be eaten.
No.
However, that is now a big sense of pride for us.
With this large amount of animals roaming freely in a confined space, there is constant damage caused to the landscape. Plants and trees are eaten, trodden on, rubbed against or simply pushed over. Crews go out every night after the park has closed to repair and replant. Occasionally, this will involve the replacement of a whole tree. It's a little past midnight and I'm out with the crew replanting grasses. It's quite an odd feeling being out this place at night, where just a few hours ago, lions, cheetahs, elephants and giraffes were roaming freely. Can I have a go? Sure. That's the top. Deep enough? Good. That's enough for me. One of the main challenges of keeping animals in a captive situation is veterinary care. you have to look after them.
All the animals here, whether it be an elephant or a tiny little bird, get a full physical exam. And that's what we're going to do today with these bullfrogs. With our physical exams, we see how much they weigh. We look in their eyes and in their nose and their mouth to same kind of things that your dog or cat might have happen if it goes in for an examination.
What would you do if you found something wrong with this frog? I mean, are they big enough to actually operate on?
Sure. We actually have another bullfrog that had some cysts in its abdomen, and we were worried that they might be something infectious that we needed to treat. So we did a laparoscopic surgery similar to how they're removing gallbladders and other laparoscopic exams with people, and we have that kind of equipment we can use on smaller animals too.
And what are you doing now?
Performing an ultrasound exam, and you may be able to see some of the movement here in the middle of the screen.
Yeah.
And that's actually the animal's heart beating. And just around the heart, this is all liver tissue. And just next to the liver, see if I can get a little better view, is a black round area, and that's the animal's gallbladder. So the ultrasound exam lets us look at a lot of the internal organs without actually having to do any kind of surgery. So it's a really nice way for us to see if the animal's healthy by looking on the inside without having to do anything more invasive. Unlike the zoos of days gone by where animals would live with their own species in a very small confined area, what's unique to this park is the fact that they're living in a huge area in a semi-captive situation, so that they have a large area to roam, but we don't have the same kind of predator problems or other environmental problems that you would have in the wild.
Each night, the larger species have been trained to come in from the park so they can shelter in comfort, be fed as necessary, and most important, be checked for any injuries or illness. The various species have been trained to respond to individual call signals at the end of the day. Noah, thank goodness he got them all in safely, or we'd have no animals to look at at all. But I must say, having met all these people, I'm glad to be living in a time when people realise the importance of caring about wildlife and respecting the way animals live. Have a good holiday. Bye.